The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. This is Jacqueline with New York SBO. Thank you for joining us for the Risk Intelligence Opportunity for School Business Officials webinar series provided by NYSER. I have two guys that are going to help us deliver the pizza today, and I'll turn it over to Lee Gaby.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. We are going to talk about a few things other than pizza, but we wanted to kind of kick off with a little funny note that one of our presenter slides uses for reference slices, and that made me hungry, so I thought, well, we'll deliver the pizza today. But seriously, we've got a great program lined up. We've got our presenter team together again. Those of you who may have been with us last time may remember that we introduced Jeff Marshall, and we're going to rely heavily on his skills and presentation this afternoon. Jeff is a recovering risk manager. You might, no, seriously, Jeff is a former risk manager for the City of Philadelphia Schools. He is an attorney, has a lot of experience in both the public sector as well as previously in the private sector. And Jeff is working on this presentation on behalf of the Public School Risk Institute as a special project manager, and we're very grateful for his time, his leadership in putting together the slides and guiding us through the discussion today about 8 essential skills for the risk intelligence school business official. We're glad you've joined us. We have a chat bar. I think you may be familiar with that. Do we need to go back over that, Jacqueline? Is that pretty clear for everybody, you think?
I'm not sure. We can do, if you have a question, you can raise your hand and we'll answer the question. And also, if you do have a question, you can put in the chat and we'll keep an eye on that.
Okay. We'll be happy to try to answer your questions, and we'll try to stop wherever you feel that it helps you. If you let us know, we'll stop and answer your questions, or we can take questions at the end. We have about 45 minutes worth of material that we'd like to cover. We also want to leave enough time for any questions at the end, or again, if you want to stop us in the middle, please do so. I think right now what I'll do is just turn it back over to Jeff and let you take us forward, Jeff. Thanks again.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. To start with, if you do have a question, please go ahead and ask it at that moment. Don't wait till the end, because this way it stays in context and it helps everybody to get more involved with the process. Okay, let's just get coordinated here on the slide. Okay. We're going to be talking about the 8 essentials. The very first essential skill is teaching everyone in the organization that everyone owns a slice of the risk management pie. It's critical that people realize it starts with me. I own it. That having been said, it takes place in different ways depending on where in the organization you reside. We usually break out the organization into 3 levels: the oversight, the common risk infrastructure, and then where the rubber meets the road, or the risk process. I realize that today I'm talking to the board of directors or to executive management. One thing that you're going to see as it goes on is that you can't just give dictates from above and have them get adopted. It's part of the process where it flows downward, but it also flows upward. And I just kind of get used to coordinating all this. Since we have some new participants, as we're talking about risk, I need to just very quickly explain what risk is. Normally when I teach at a university level, the very first class that I walk into, I say, okay, everybody grab a pen. I want you to jot down your definition of risk. Invariably, the definition that comes back is something along this line. People talk of risk as exposure to loss, exposure to injury, to a hazard. And as long as you're thinking of risk in those terms, you are missing what risk management is all about. When we look at risk management, from the board of directors and the executive management team, we aren't talking about the actual risk management nuts and bolts. We're trying to get you folks to be risk intelligent. Now, as we talk about loss of risk, That's not what we really look at when we're talking about risk management. What risk management is to us, it's the quantification or the measurement of the difference of what you expected over time. And we're going to be talking about quantification a little bit later on in this presentation. But when you look at that definition, what it really tells you is that your expectations, I was expecting to do well, we did much better than we anticipated, or I didn't see that coming, and boy, did we get hit blindsided. That should have never happened. It's the deviation of what your expectation was. What we want to talk about is how do you maximize your opportunities? How do you reduce your hazards? How do you balance the two against each other? To do that, we're going to be talking about examples throughout this presentation. But now let's get back to our pyramid. From the oversight or the board of directors level, you need to start off by emphasizing to people that there are hazards and there are rewards, and that you're interested in both. You're interested in the positive outcome, you're interested in the negative outcome. You can control both, and from a board of directors position, you need to make it clear that you do intend on controlling both. It's not just in your policy statements, but you do want to go back, you want to look at your policy statements, you want to make sure that you are talking about risk being a reward or an opportunity, not just a hazard. When you're in meetings, you should be discussing your plans in terms of these are the opportunities that are being presented. Here's how we can maximize the opportunities. What does it take to remove those objects that can impede our opportunities? Here are our hazards. How do we mitigate our hazards? How do we mitigate the negative risks? From the executive management level, I know we have a number of executive managers here. From that C level, you start looking at, the example that I'm using this time is building security. From an oversight perspective, the board of directors start talking about the fact that we have new risks. We're in a new society of risks. Or we may have gangs that are starting to form, or we already have gangs. From the executive management level, you start looking at what's it going to take in the way of people, what's it going to take in the way of process, what's it going to take in the way of technology to address it on a large scale level, but you're also starting to bring it into the individual schools. I know I have a problem at this particular school, and I need to get the assets to that school. From that business unit level, one of the examples that I like to use is chemical management. The business unit, it could be the custodial staff, it could be the food handlers, it could be teachers having different chemicals in their rooms. I'm not talking about chemistry teachers. I'm talking about teachers who have hand cleansers, who may have bottles of different cleaners, or the cleaning crew left some bottles in their room. Again, the business units have to develop very specific procedures. How do we make sure that the chemicals are being put away? How are we making sure that the chemicals are being put into bottles that are marked? How are we locking them up? What processes are we using? This is a process that goes up and down the food chain, because as a board of director, you're giving broad brush strokes of plans, but you need to know how is this playing out at the lowest level. They need to be able to talk to you and to let you understand, here's where we're running into problems. It sounds like a great idea, but I just don't have the manpower, or my machines are broken, whatever it may be. Risk management is a process that is collaborative. It moves up and down that pyramid at all times. I hate to go back to that circle and that pizza image, but realistically, it really is a very circular event. A circle has no beginning, it has no end. You become the beginning. That's why we had titled this presentation, It Starts With Me. I break the circle, and it starts with me. The second essential skill that you need to understand is understanding that all risk is interrelated. No risk is isolated. And to demonstrate that, the case of the burned out light bulb is the one that we like to use. Now, the scenario is that the stairwell has a burned out light bulb. It keeps burning out. There's a short in the fixture. That's a bigger problem. That could lead to a fire in your building. That could lead to further erosion of your electrical system. We're not going to look at that right now. We're looking at the burned out light bulb in the stairwell. The dark stairwell results in a teacher falling and sustaining an injury. That means that you just lost an effective educator for an extended period of time. You've got increased expenses suddenly for additional or replacement personnel, and now you may have the union starting to grab the microphone and say, we've had problems with all of our stairwells, and now your burned out light bulb has become a communications and a risk management problem. You've got increased expenses for medical treatment for the teacher, for lost wages for that teacher. You've got increased legal fees. And on top of that, your workers' compensation rating is going to go up. You may be paying more in workers' compensation insurance next year and for the next 3 years because of that burned out bulb.
Jeff, this is Lee. Can I ask you 1 second?
Please.
When you say increased workers' compensation, you're referring to the experience rating modification factor? Is that what you mean?
Yes. For those who aren't familiar with it, think of it in terms of your auto insurance. You end up getting 3, 4, 5 tickets, or your kid gets 3, 4, 5 tickets for driving your car, and you've had a couple accidents. Your kid has the accidents with your car. Well, the insurance company says that car is going to be in an accident. It's going to cost us more money. They're going to raise your rates.
I think Jeff, I think they understand what the experience mod is. I just want to clarify that's the rating you're talking about.
Yes, that is what I was discussing.
Okay.
Or let's talk about a student falling in the stairwell, or gets assaulted, in the stairwell. That could lead to, again, the increased legal fees as they sue, communications problems or public relations problems, and in risk management, we have a whole field called communications risk management, how to control the message. You're going to have to go into control mode if they start talking about our schools are just unsafe. If your school is sitting on the bubble where you're about to start having gangs showing up, or worse, you actually do have gangs, and it happens to be a gang member got hurt or somebody who was thinking about joining a gang, and they were assaulted in a stairwell, you now have a whole new issue that's going to end up becoming part of that communications problem. That's going to become part of the expense problem. As it starts growing, you lose that secure feeling in your building. Students aren't going to be able to learn as well because of the loss of security in their environment. You can start losing experienced educators, which again leads to increased expenses of having to get replacement educators. This is what we call the total cost of risk. Again, it was a burned out light bulb, but these are the problems that can start developing. It's why, as the top of the pyramid, you have to talk safety. From the middle of the pyramid, you have to be checking to make sure that safety is taking place. From the bottom of the pyramid, the business units, the principal has to make sure that the lights aren't burning out, that if there's a burned out light bulb, it gets addressed immediately. Risk is something that we all own. We all have a slice. Essential skill number 3 is that we must learn to maintain the highest levels of vigilance for threats and opportunities in our operating environment. Again, I can't emphasize enough that risk is not loss. Risk is also gain. It's an upside risk. And in that respect, you don't want to give up those opportunities. Okay, again, we want to constructively anticipate. We know that we may have problems with weapons coming into our schools. We anticipate it by putting security systems in, metal detectors in. We have opportunities. We want to try to anticipate those as well. How do we constructively anticipate? Opportunities. There are federal and state grants that are out there. You want to have someone who is monitoring that, or some organization that helps you to monitor it. It would be horrible that you could have competed for Race to the Top, but you found out 3 days before it closed, or 3 days after it closed. There's cooperative purchasing of supplies, maybe with your municipality, maybe with other school districts. These are opportunities. Again, these are upside risks. Shared services. When I was the mayor of my community, we realized that the school budget is the only budget that you can vote on. You can't vote for the federal budget or against it. You can't vote for the state budget. You can't vote against the municipal budget. So people used to punish the schools. And we found ways to have the government pick up the cost. For instance, pick up the cost of snow removal. So that way that could be reduced in the school budget and help the school budget pass. These are opportunities. Public-private initiatives. Again, there are opportunities or upside risks. Downside risks, the one that I like to talk about is the last one, pandemic flu planning. The last really bad pandemic flu was 1917. So why do we really want to plan it? Because now with computers, as most of you know, there are computer charter schools that do everything over the internet. We have an opportunity, so if a pandemic flu hits, we can continue teaching our students. But that's taking a hazard and turning it into an opportunity. It's by thinking about risk management at the higher levels and realizing how can we make risk management our friend. Essential skill number 4 is ensuring that risk management is data-driven. To me, this is the heart and soul of risk management. A number of years ago, well, actually, before I get to that, there are certain rules about data. And I suspect that everyone who's listening here appreciates the fact that an organization, a business, an enterprise has to be data-driven. The first rule in risk management is that which is not measured will not be addressed. Secondly, data is only as valuable if it's accurate and complete. As a decision maker, you need the data to be good data, and you need it timely so that you can make good decisions. A couple of years ago, I had a colleague from a school district contact me because he just couldn't put his fingers on something that he knew was out there. He knew it was a problem, but he couldn't figure out what was wrong. These were the results that he had. Now, I'm hoping that you can see my cursor, but the second column is the national code system, and these numbers are the actual code. For him, the number one problem was lifting, and that tipped him off because he didn't think lifting was a problem. Lifting accidents were problems. He knew they were out there. I said to him, maybe it's a sleeper. Maybe you didn't realize how bad it was. Well, when we looked, we saw that there were only 173 claims. So what I said to him is, pull all your claims. In workers' compensation, you're required, I don't care what state you're in, every state requires that you file what's called a first report of incident. And that's where that NCCI code shows up. But there's also a narrative where they write down what happened. The people who are taking this information, maybe your insurance company, it may be your third-party administrator, but someone plugs in the code, and they also write a narrative. Once he pulled all of those, we started looking at them, and what we found is, as you can see, this is the 80s series. We found that a lot of these, well, not talking about lifting first, but looking at the 80 series, we found that there was a lot of struck strike by fellow workers or patient. Now, teachers aren't beating up teachers. Principals aren't beating up teachers. Those were assaults by students. And whoever took the report assumed patient, student is close enough. That's how I'm going to categorize it. Other people said, well, I'm going to be pressing charges because that student hit me. And next thing you know, it became an 89, strike, a person in an act of a crime. Others, well, I got hit with a chair. I got hit when the kid threw a baseball at me or threw a bottle at me. So that got recorded as objects handled by others. And then, of course, the catch-all, 81. So once we started recategorizing it, we suddenly found that, and what we did was anything that was student assault, we decided would be called an 89. It changed what we had going. We then looked at the lifting episodes. As we started looking at the lifting episodes, we found that in the 50 series, we had a whole bunch of them, and as we started reading, we found that the description was I had lifted it and started carrying it up the hallway, but the injury happened as a lifting, not a carrying. Or I lifted it and twisted as I was lifting. I lost my balance, twisted, and pulled out my back. Well, the root cause was really the lifting, not the carrying, not the twisting. Again, once we sorted those out, we found that lifting was significant, holding and carrying was a little less significant, and quite honestly, twisting was not an issue. This was the one that I found the most interesting, in that there's one other category, which is fall, trip, slip on snow or ice, and it wasn't in the stack. What we found was that a number of people were falling from the top of the stairs on snow or ice, and it was called falling from different levels, or falling on stairs, or falling on water, or falling not otherwise categorized. It wasn't recorded as snow and ice. If I give that information to you as a decision maker, you would never think about buying more calcium chloride or making sure that we have a schedule for clearing snow and ice. Because you had bad information, you made a bad decision. The other thing that we found was that we had a lot of teachers standing up on chairs and desks, and the desk would flip over. I had one in particular where there was a physics teacher who stood on the extension of the desk, and of course it flipped over, and we got to ask him, was he familiar with the concept of fulcrum? But once we resorted these out, it turned out that the second issue that we needed to look at was falling from chairs and desks, and that snow and ice suddenly became an issue where before it wasn't. As you're seeing, good information can lead to good decisions. What they did was they started looking at de-escalation training, anti-bullying, and peer court programs to start trying to address the biggest issue. They also started looking at having more police in the school district. It was a small school district, relatively speaking, and so they worked with the local police department to start getting police to monitor the schools so that they could address the issues. They started getting step ladders because they realized if you can't afford the step ladders, you can't afford the cost of the injury. They also started purchasing carts to eliminate lifting injuries. Good information will lead to good decisions. So one of the key elements that we always need to think about is making sure that we have good, clean, audited data. And from the highest levels, you have to make sure that your risk manager understands it. You need to make sure that it's being audited. It's not just being passed up the food chain. Essential skill number 5. We sustain operational discipline at every level of the organization. You can't be the absentee landlord of risk management because you're higher up in the organization. Everybody has to be accountable, and it's only done when discipline is maintained. the key is you go back and first you think through what could go wrong, and then afterwards you go back and figure out, how did we do? Could we have done better? Could we have, it's like a basketball game or a baseball game. Could we have executed a play a little better and gotten a higher score? Could we have done something to minimize the risk, to mitigate the risk? Now, one of the things that always takes place is that the team that had the problem goes back and looks. One of the keys that we found to making it work a lot better is that one level above has to also look at it, because you're the level who decides, well, we could have more, we could spend more money to get locks on those doors that had the chemicals. We could get more inspections taking place to make sure that the roofs aren't about to give way. That's what it comes down to. You want to include the next level above. That always can get ugly, because once you start doing that, there's always this fear of it suddenly becomes an issue of whose fault was it. When we talk about operational discipline, what we are talking about is that discipline means finding the root cause, not a hunt for fault or blame. The one case that stands out the most in my mind was there was a school being built. They had the steelwork going up. It was just that giant metal skeleton. There was one of the steel workers at lunchtime went back to his truck, and he had a couple beers. He went back up on the steelwork. He's not tethered at this moment. He goes to slip around another employee who is tethered, and he's on that 8-inch, maybe 12-inch beam, loses his balance, falls, and has some incredibly serious injuries. The safety committee for the contractor has a discussion, and they decided that the root cause was his drinking. And they decided that they had to be better, more vigilant at watching for that. I pointed out that I didn't think that that was the root cause. And the reason why was, if he was sober and tried to get around on that 8-inch or 12-inch beam when there's another person on it, anybody, a sober person, could lose balance. The root cause was he wasn't tethered. The difference is, when you say, well, he was drinking, you have laid blame on that person. When you say we need to start making sure that our people are tethered, now you've reached root cause. That's operational discipline. How do you achieve operational discipline? Safety committees. They get this, your safety committees will look at your buildings and say, we have a burned out light, or this light keeps burning out, there's something wrong. The handrail is loose. There's potholes. Can you address all of it? No, you can't. And safety committees get incredibly zealous. But it helps you to start getting information. The more information, the better the decisions. You start setting up to make sure that opportunities are relayed to all people in the chain in a timely manner. Again, a grant. You don't want that to get away if it was something that's going to give you an opportunity. And of course, constant vigilance. Constantly keep going back and pressing your committees to do better. Not to punish them, but to encourage them to move beyond their constraints or beyond the point that they've reached. We spend a lot of time giving out awards to safety committees when they achieve certain things, so that way they realize that their work is appreciated, and it pushes them to move on to even better heights. Of course, tethered while they're at those heights. The key, though, in all of that is you have to have your systems in place in time to anticipate situations. It goes back to having the discipline to get set up before time and to stay on top of it at all times. Essential skill number 6 is sustaining operational discipline at every level of the organization. If the board of directors puts a policy statement into their policy and doesn't do anything else, if they've disconnected themselves from that process, then the next level knows that there's no accountability going upward. They start to lose their edge. If they're losing their edge, then where the rubber meets the road, as I like to say, they stop keeping their edge. If nobody is watching to make sure that when there's a water spill, the little wet floor sign goes up, then it's going to stop happening. A principal should be able to catch the custodian, not the engineer, but the custodian, and say to the custodian, where is the wet floor sign? And the custodian should know it. Just as a quick aside, those wet floor signs, you may wonder what value do they have? There have been a number of studies where what they will do is they'll put a wet floor sign at two ends of a hallway, and people, they'll video it. You see people actually taking shorter footsteps. They'll slow down their pace. So it's important that you have the discipline that the custodian is putting the sign up and knows where the sign is. I was recently at an airport. I was at a restaurant at an airport, and the waiter slipped and spilled a beer on one of the customers. And the waiter, the manager, became focused on that poor customer, trying to clean up the customer. And nobody stopped to realize that there's still a puddle on the floor, and that you're going to have more problems because now someone's going to fall and have a real injury. They lost their discipline. They have to practice discipline at every moment to sustain that discipline at all times and at all levels. How does it play out? Again, from the top level, you have to establish your priorities. The board of directors sees the world from a higher level, but they understand that there are conflicting objectives. As a board of director, you have to get those coordinated. That's where your risk management is coming in. Your risk intelligence tells you, how do I take these conflicting concepts or objectives and get them to fit together? The one other thing that we talk about in risk management is courage. Having the courage and the discipline to regularly challenge your fundamental business assumptions and making sure that everyone below you has the courage to challenge their programs, to make sure that the protocols are still cutting edge. From an executive management standpoint, you keep your discipline by making sure that you are getting reports that have been tested, that have been audited, making sure that you're getting all the information you need. In the last presentation, I was talking about how I had a TPA who presented information to us about injuries, and we had it stratified by ages. The reason why is a 20-year-old who lifts and has an injury is going to be back at work quicker than a 50-year-old. A 20-year-old has a better chance of lifting 40 pounds than a 50-year-old does. And so we want to see who's having lifting injuries and how long they're staying out. We stratified it by age. And when we did that, we found that the stratification had people coming in that were 103 years old or were 0 to 12 years old. We're a school district. We don't have child labor. We also don't have anybody in the 100-year-old range. The data was bad. It became meaningless. We couldn't stratify it to determine how do we address issues at different age groups. So again, from the executive management standpoint, your operational discipline is making sure that you are getting reports that have all the information. insurance companies, TPAs, a lot of times don't give you all the information so that you could piece it together. If you're at a business unit level, you need to develop appropriate protocols. A great one is your chemistry department. They have lots and lots of chemicals, and the classic way of storing chemicals was that you would put them on a shelf or put them in a closet alphabetically so that you could find them easily. The problem is that you're putting alkalis and acids together. And if something happens where they both get knocked off the shelf, you now have a reaction taking place. The better way of doing it is you put your alkalis on one wall, you put your acids on the other wall. Well, these are protocols. You want to make sure if you are at that business unit that you can develop the best protocols, and that afterwards you're monitoring it to make sure no one's getting lazy, to make sure that the teacher who's working with those chemicals isn't just putting them up on a shelf for tomorrow. But of course, constant training, which that comes, even though it's in the blue section, that comes by a mandate from the pink section. And I think we have a technical problem here. We're not moving up. There we are. Hold on. Okay. Okay, that's the same slide again. Sorry, folks.
There you go, Jeff.
Essential skill number 7 is having the courage to take enough of the right risk to promote innovation and development. Again, risk is upside risk. It's not just downside risk. I was in a situation a couple years back of a meeting of school officials. And after the formal presentation, everybody was sitting around decompressing. And a couple of them started talking, a couple of the officials started talking about foreign travel, and it's become the bane of their existence, that they hate how much foreign travel takes up of their time or of their resources, and even though they want to eliminate it, they viewed it as stepping on the third rail. A number of the officials said, oh, we don't have trips to foreign countries. And I sat there thinking to myself, I graduated in the 70s from high school. And back then, even we had foreign travel. We were going to Mexico, we were going to Canada. Okay, Canada may not be a foreign country. We were going to Poland, we were going to Italy. How do you not have that right now? But it turned out that they just saw the risks as being too great. We got to talking. I started saying, how can you take that approach? Again, if you work within the system of risk management, you have a systematic and disciplined approach to creating a value for these students. You develop and deploy effective strategies for that value creation and for the protection. You constructively anticipate potential causes of failure. And then again, you go back to that high level of vigilance. How do you do it in real life? I mean, that sounds really wonderful. If you're talking about that foreign trip, the spring break to a foreign country, you start off by talking to other districts. How do they do it? If you're going to Mexico, if you're going to Italy, talk to the State Department. Now, just as a quick aside, the State Department is not the end-all, be-all. The State Department says that Mexico is safe travel, and I would not allow any class trips or any school trips in the entire Philadelphia school district to go to Mexico at this time. Talk to professional risk management organizations like NICER. If they don't have the answer, they have the resources to get you that answer. You talk to travel agents. You talk to insurance and risk advisors. You start developing a process. You don't just say we're doing it or we're not doing it. You start listing your risk manager. This is what you're paying your risk manager for, or your risk management consultant. You start developing what are the issues that we could be dealing with. What about getting the right shots, getting your papers in order so that way you can get people through the airport, your chaperones, converting money. You start listing this and you start putting together your plan. What happens if one of my chaperones gets ill? What happens if one of my kids get ill? You start listing all this. It's not to scare you away. It's to create vigilance. Another example would be working with mentors in the community. When I arrived at the Philadelphia School District, some schools were quietly doing mentoring programs and hoping that the administration wouldn't find out about it. And the reason why was the administration, at some level, at some time, had decided that the mentoring issue was a dead issue. It was primarily coming out of the legal department. And by background, I'm an attorney with 20 years of trial experience under my belt. I'm the guy who would have to deal with the problem when the problem became realized, when the risk became realized. And we started talking about the problem was that they couldn't get background searches on the companies that were doing the mentoring. If you had an accounting firm with 6 people, yeah, you could get that. But if you were going over to Deloitte, how would you get hundreds of people background checked? And would Deloitte even agree to it? And would people say, yes, I'm willing to get background checked? Good chance no. Risk management, you start looking at all the issues. And what the solution became was we said, well, if we send our students in groups of 2, 3, 4, and explain to them they have to stay as a group. You can't be separated from your group. If you're a group of 2 and one of you can't make it, the other one isn't allowed to go. If you start talking to the students who are in the mentoring program and finding out how it's going, are they getting comfortable, are they uncomfortable, you've now taken your upside risk, your opportunity, and you've realized it. Again, it comes down to having the courage to go and achieve great things through understanding your risk. Essential skill number 8, we regularly challenge our fundamental business assumptions. It has to happen at every level. It has to happen from the highest level saying, we need to start having foreign travel because kids can learn cultural, language. It just broadens the horizon. All the way down to the business assumption of checking to make sure that we have locks on the doors where the cleaning supplies are kept. So that way our grade school students don't stumble in there and touch something and put their hands in their mouths. At this point, this is really coming down to the end. I guess for many risk managers, our inspiration is really President Lincoln, who to me is one of the greatest risk takers of all time. The dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate for the stormy present. As our case is new, so we must think anew and act anew. This was a man who was willing to challenge the fundamental business assumptions of a nation. He understood that just one generation earlier, when our founding fathers took great risks because they understood the upside risk, they understood that the fight that Lincoln took on couldn't be taken on during their time. Lincoln understood and evaluated the risks. As we look at our fundamental business assumptions, we need to realize if President Lincoln was willing to take something that big, surely our challenging our fundamental business assumptions is a lot easier. And so I encourage everyone to do it. And so I guess we came in at about, 45 minutes. And please, I hope that this has caused some of you to have questions about how can you make it happen? How can you take it from being a presentation and get it to become a living organism in your district. So by all means, hopefully we have some questions.
Jeff, we'll keep the line open here. I want to jump in and thank you for going through all this so quickly and carefully with us. As I was taking notes, I was remembering one of the things that you and I talked about that's a skill that you sort of emphasized, and maybe all of us today are thinking about, and that's listening to others and working through some of these processes, particularly with the discipline that you talked about. Could you go back and maybe comment on one thing that you touched on this at the first session, and you mentioned the communication risk. Is there something for the audience to take home in terms of their personal responsibility in terms of communication risk? You sort of talked on this a couple times. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
Okay, as far as communication risk management, the example that I gave at the last presentation is that when chief legal counsel, if it's your general counsel, if it's your hired counsel, when the lawyers take the microphone, it's their way of saying that I'll see you in court, that we are going to engage the fight. If you have the chief financial officer taking the microphone, he could sing or she could sing happy birthday because no one's listening to the chief financial officer except your funding source, which would be, I guess, in most cases, your state is your primary funding source. They're talking to your state finance or to your city financing officials. There's timing of how do you communicate. Sometimes you want to have just a low-level person communicating because that's symbolizing, or it's keeping it down below the radar. It's not saying it's a critical moment. It's providing information without providing it as a critical moment. But if the CEO, if the chairperson from your school board, if your CEO, your superintendent, takes the microphone, it's suddenly saying it is the most important thing taking place in my district. And that can be dangerous. That can be horribly dangerous, especially if you don't have everything that you need. Sometimes you want the CEO to take the microphone, or the superintendent to take the microphone, because she can instill or he can instill some calm in the situation. But sometimes you don't want them taking it right away. You want to let other people let it develop, so that way it gives the superintendent more room. But what you always need to think about is any communication that you make is going to reverberate, and non-communication also is going to reverberate. So when you're making decisions, you always have to keep in the back of your mind, how do I communicate this? I want to roll out a new curriculum. How am I going to communicate it? So now I just saw somebody I just sent me that some people may not know. I had used the phrase TPA. If I could jump over that real fast. A TPA is a third-party administrator. Some of you may have third-party administrators for your workers' compensation program. Some may have it for your benefits program. It's an outside organization that manages it for you. Think of it as if you buy insurance, auto insurance. When you have an accident, your auto insurance company comes out and they do all the paperwork and they do all the investigation and they make the payment on your behalf. But if you're self-insured, you are the insurance company. So you either need to have somebody ready to go out and do the investigations and all the paperwork, or you hire a company. And that company is called a TPA, or a third-party administrator. So I'm sorry that I used that phrase without explaining it before time.
I think that's fine. We're looking for some questions from the audience before we wrap up. I wanted to make another point that you were, you referenced, I guess, risk communication or communication risk. The audience of school business officials are often the ones in the middle. As you pointed out, I think there's the 3 levels, and their job is to be connectors often between those who are at the top, the superintendent, and those who may be down in the department level. So they've got a different communication challenge than maybe those at the top, but they still have a communication skill set that's important. I really appreciate focusing on the courage part, and I think that's something that gets overlooked. These 8 essentials that you used, I believe we talked about this last time, that they were from a longer list of 10 essential practices and 10 essential skills that Deloitte's risk management practice leaders had developed. Is that correct?
Yes. Excuse me. Deloitte had done a wonderful job of isolating the skills and the concepts that you should be looking at. What this presentation hopefully did was to distill it even further down to an even tighter thought process. And what they look at is they don't lean on the courage aspect so much, but really risk management is an issue of courage because people think in terms of risk, again, being downside risk, a negative outcome. And so what happens is you shy away from something that could go terribly wrong, and so you lose that chance for it to go wonderfully right. Risk management, you can't eliminate all risk. The way you eliminate the risk of having a plane hijacked is you ground all your planes forevermore. But then you eliminate the ability to move people or goods from place to place efficiently. You don't eliminate every risk. Risk avoidance is always your last step. If you stop and you think in terms of, we have an opportunity, we have a situation, let's stop and examine it from a risk perspective. The highest levels have to say, you know something, we want to encourage all opportunities for education. That opens the door for the middle level, for that middle level in the pyramid to say, we've been given the green light to try new ways of educating. It means that the superintendent now has the power to say, perhaps we should be looking at automotive repair, or an automotive repair program. Perhaps we can't afford that, but we can start looking at a program with a partnership with our community, with some of the larger auto dealers, let's say. But you have to say, I'm willing to take that risk. And once you say I'm willing to take that risk, I'm willing to take the risk that we are going to have a great program. I'm also willing to take the risk that things could go very, very bad. We're putting kids out in the community without proper supervision. Let's stop and look at that so that way we don't lose our opportunity. And again, it keeps going back to that desire to not fear greatness, that desire to have the courage to try something new. And I found that I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of superintendents, and they all seem deep down inside to want to try to make their imprint on their community. By understanding risk, you get that opportunity. You don't have to fear the failure part, because you can understand that failure is something that can be mitigated. So that way we can increase our opportunities. Sorry for sounding like I'm on a soapbox.
Well, no, you're doing great, and we appreciate your inspiration on this. You've helped us with some thoughts of ways that we'll be smarter about risk. We've got maybe a minute or two. We're still waiting for anyone from the audience to make a question for us. I do want to thank Jacqueline for being our host with New York ASBO today. Jacqueline, excuse me. Matt Darius was out of the office for this week, so we'll be getting back with him on the third session, which is actually scheduled for September 19th, and we're going to do a little different direction because we're going to talk about risk intelligent finance, or how we actually use that cost of risk that Jeff mentioned in everyday decisions. I really liked your light bulb and the connecting of all the interrelated issues when something simple like a light bulb is missing or not maintained. This next session, I think, will bring this home towards those who are dealing with money every day and the questions of what things cost and how they're interrelated.
If I may, just to give a preview on it, we had a situation where we had people, teachers, saying, I have to get my room decorated by a certain time period. That's what the rules are. I don't have a ladder. I'm going to stand on my desk. I'm going to stand on chairs. And we have an incredible number of injuries. And it was very difficult to get people, and I'm coming from the finance department. I'm in the finance department, getting people to realize that if you can't afford to buy 3, 4, 5 more step ladders and be accountable that we know where they are so that people can use them, if you can't afford 5 step ladders, you can't afford the broken ankle. You can't afford the 13 weeks out with some student or some classroom not getting proper education for 13, 14, 15 weeks. And so one of the toughest things, and that's what hopefully in the next session we'll be discussing, is the understanding that risk management is really a matter of finance. And how do you make your finances work? How do you make it accountable? Again, one thing very quickly that we started pioneering was what we called gain share, where we started looking at schools and saying, well, and it's worked a lot better in a large district, I'll concede that. But if you can save money by taking certain design steps, the money that gets saved will be shared with you. And as schools get more and more pressed on their budgets, to be able to say to a school, if you run a safer operation, we will give you extra money for you to do as you wish with it, to become a discretionary fund. It's amazing how that gets people's attention. Well, basically, we're paying people to do the right thing, but as of right now, we're paying people to do the wrong thing. We pay someone to be out on workers' comp, and then we pay someone else to do their job.
That's a good point. And that sort of leads us to the fact that we've got school starting in New York in very short order, and we have Labor Day coming up. And we want to thank everyone that's on the call today. It's been a great audience. We want you to have a safe and healthy Labor Day weekend, and we're all excited about the start of school and hope that this Risk Intelligence series is helpful to you, and that you might send us your questions if you weren't able to ask them today or didn't think of something later on. I'm sure Jacqueline or any of the staff members at ASBO would be happy to help. I think we've provided a link to the PowerPoint slides today, and I'm going to turn it back over to Jacqueline for any other final comments or closing. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee, and thank you, Jeff. I will be emailing also the link or the PowerPoint presentation out to everyone, and if you have any questions, you can send them to me or reply to the email that you got when your registration, which is Matt Arias, and we'll get them to Lee or Jeff. And thank you very much, and we hope to see you on the 19th. And good luck with school opening.
Thank you.
Good luck to everybody. Jacqueline, thank you for all your help on this.
You're welcome.